Live now. Hello, folks. We're back again with better audio this time. It's probably a good reminder to all of us that audio sometimes just breaks, and that's okay. We just go ahead and figure it out. So, what we were talking about was using your unique personality, understanding yourself. And one of the things we said just before we hopped off to fix some tech issues, Antonia, you were talking about the when to know when to press forward versus when you're actually getting a real signal that the path you're going in is the wrong direction. Mm-hmm. I'm intensely curious about this as I'm making my business plans for 2022. Mm-hmm. And I think even this morning, I was talking with my wife about, so it could go this way or it could go this way. Ought I to go deploy more tools along a particular social media channel for developing this business I'm acquiring, or should I go do a new thing that's not proven, that's going to take a lot more energy? And the consequences matter a lot about which channel to go develop. And we all have that in our business lives and our personal lives everywhere. So I want to know more about how can I tell about when I am making a good decision that's aligned with my values versus when should I listen to that voice that is saying that's not going to work, or when should I ignore that voice?
So, what were you saying before? And I don't know how much I bring of that, or just go ahead and repeat the whole idea.
Go ahead. I'm going to go delete earlier. So we had some audio things. So just go ahead.
I'll just repeat the whole idea. So there's the distinction comes in this concept that sometimes advice takes 2 to 3 times the amount of effort for half the return, because it's getting you out of your comfort zone and it's good for you to stretch. But it feels bad in the moment because it is out of your comfort zone and it's out of your sort of, it's out of your frame of reference. You don't have reference experience for this yet. And so it just takes a lot of effort to go through it. And then in those moments when it's good for you, it's a stretch, it's outside your comfort zone, it's worth it to throw extra energy and time and attention to build the discipline. But then there are things that are 2 to 3 times the effort and half the return and will remain that way in perpetuity because it's opposite from how your mind is wired. And understanding the distinction. So it's not just like, is this a good decision? Is this aligned with my values? It's actually more, is my mind wired to look at the world in this way? Is it rewarded when it takes these certain behaviors? Am I going to get sufficient dopamine and serotonin hits as I'm taking these actions so that as I watch myself improve over time, it will be rewarding enough for me to keep going and it's sustainable action versus I'm always going to throw a ton of energy at this thing and I'm never going to get the return on investment that somebody who's maybe say more wired to do this would. And those are hard to know without a guide. Right?
Yeah,
without understanding how a mind is wired.
It sounds so important to understand. Am I fighting an uphill battle? Because some things are much easier than other things. One of the conversations I'm having right now with clients is around what's your main content strategy for 2022? And so I ask the basic questions of, well, are you better recorded or live? Or like, what do you prefer? What are you drawn towards, right? Do you prefer to be on video, audio, or writing something? If it's writing, do you prefer short form or long form? If it's audio or video, do you prefer short form or long form? Do you prefer solo or interview? What are you drawn towards? Because if someone is they just naturally like something, and then you try to get them to do something else, maybe they can figure it out, but it's a struggle. And that's obvious in the content game. But you're talking about more of like a brainstem thing about what you're more attracted to. So let's get personal, because that's, what I do on all my content. You guys have known me for a while. What's something I might try to do in 2022 that I am not oriented towards, so that I would actually be making it way harder on myself? And for folks who don't know, I tend to test as either ENTP or ENFP. Though I know you guys go into much more detail than just the Myers-Briggs thing. From what you know of me, what's a landmine in 2022 that I should avoid, or at least think a lot about?
Which type you are is actually incredibly important when we're talking about this particular thing, particularly if you're a thinker or a feeler.
I think I'm more often ENTP. I think there was some tests where I was ENFP, but I seem to be more that ENTP inventor type more often than the F. So it's more like 2/3 as I test into one. Whereas some things like the N, I'm completely N and no S. Like there's no question there, right?
Yeah. So type and how you're wired is one node. I just want to make a note. It's one node in the system of who you are. So things like what you're attracted to when you're creating content is not necessarily going to be part of the information that can be culled from type, right? Or understanding your personality type. Other systems might handle that a little bit better. But as far as ways to use an understanding of how your mind is wired in order to avoid pitfalls, it's important to understand how to gain leverage on yourself. So depending upon how your mind is wired to make decisions, different things are going to feel like more pressure situations. Different things are going to feel like the stakes are higher. And your personality type helps, it's like a decoder ring. Like those 4 letters are a decoder ring to what's technically called cognitive functions. So cognitive functions are the way that our mind is wired. And this routes all the way back 100 years to Carl Jung's book, Psychological Types. There's a whole chapter 10 in the book Psychological Types that he wrote in 1921, where he talks about the different ways that people's minds are wired to take in information and to make decisions on that information. So you're talking about N or S, intuitive or sensor, and you're like, I'm all N. That's how your brain makes sense of the world. It's the kind of information that captures your attention. If you're an intuitive, it means that you're captured by what is a fundamentally advanced pattern recognition. You're more interested in what's going on behind the curtain than what's in front of the curtain. And so your brain is instinctively just making patterns all the time. Okay, that's what's in front of me, but what's going on where in areas I can't see? What are leaps and speculative leaps I can make about what's going on underneath the surface that I might be right about? And so that's the intuitive part. The sensory part is more like it's in front of the curtain thinking. It's like, what can be known? What can I experience? What can I personally go through and understand through my personal experience and by ruminating over it? So that's understanding that about yourself is really important, because if you're in a situation that requires you to just kind of be going through rote experience day after day, eventually your mind is not going to get the dopamine hit it's looking for in pattern recognition. So creative spaces where you can brainstorm, spaces where you can think creatively about things that are not yet invented, where you can sort of run simulations about how the future is going to pan out. Mm-hmm. All of that is going to be rewarding to how your mind is wired. And I think I'm alluding to this, but what's important to understand about this is not a limitation of your mind. It's how your mind is chemically wired to give you dopamine hits. That's effectively what these functions are. They're what is the sort of the perfume pack in my head, so that when I do certain things, it releases all of those rewarding chemicals that make me want to keep doing that. And knowing that helps you make choices that will keep you getting those dopamine hits effectively.
You're making me think about how much I love podcasting. I'll be releasing the 124th episode next week.
Congratulations.
And thank you. Over 50,000 downloads. And I love it. I get to talk to fascinating people, ask interesting questions. And one of my friends, John Robb, who I've done a bunch of podcasting with, he said that one of the things he loves about being interviewed by me is I ask him questions he's not thought of before, he's never heard before. Mm-hmm. And that idea of, I'm going to go get a really smart person, and then I'm going to ask him something they've never heard before, that strokes my ego, right? I can ask good questions. But it's what you're talking about. Like that's myself, is that I'm going to go talk to really smart people who are masters of their field, then ask them new questions that gets them to go, huh? And you see in the interviews with John Robb, in the live streams, you'll also see him literally go, and he'll just wait as he thinks, because he's thinking something new. And so that creating something new drives me. But I know some people who they like something that they know what right looks like, they know what predictable is. And if they just do a great job, whereas I like the things, I'm drawn to the things where I don't know what good looks like. I don't know what the good event or outcome of this live stream is exactly. There's some metrics like, well, how many views does it get? But the general idea of what content is going to be created, how is my life going to change in 2022 as a result of this one conversation? I don't know. And that's exciting. Whereas for some people, it's terrifying and they want to run away. I want to run towards. So we're saying I should develop a 2022 that I want to run towards, and anything that I want to run away from myself. And you were saying earlier, wrote things where there's the same, I forgot how you phrased it, but the same thing week after week, and it's predictable. Yeah, the outsourcing those things, because I don't get lit on fire. I get lit on fire literally, not figuratively. Like it's boring to do the same thing, right? I want to go farm that out. Like that doesn't really excite me. So I have a podcast producer, Rihanna at Riverwood Media, who manages the podcast, for the most part, I don't even know when episodes go live. It's not my problem. I record them, and then I occasionally help choose the titles. Besides that, she chooses the quote art. She makes the video snippets, everything she handles, because that's not creative. It's a little bit like choosing the quotes to highlight is a little bit creative, but not a lot. Whereas talking to people, that's really creative. So that's building those relationships, having these conversations. It's so exciting.
Two things from that. The conversation piece is so critical. When someone is an intuitive or has a lot of intuition as part of their personality, conversation is where that need can often be met, because it's idea generation. It's talking with somebody else that also thinks maybe intuitively, that can bounce ideas back and forth. And I think
specifically brainstorming,
things of this nature. But also I think there's a certain part of intuition, or some people have a certain intuition that needs a little bit more quiet, needs some sensory deprivation in order to work really well. And it's not as obvious maybe as more of an extroverted, outgoing part of the intuition that some people have. So it depends again on the personality type. But also just to speak to the idea that this idea of mundane kind of day-to-day things versus the abstract big ideas, most people are wired not intuitively. Like there's only 25% of the population roughly that's wired that way. So it's much like being a left-handed person in a right-handed person's world to be an intuitive. The world is mostly set up a little differently than the needs that intuitives have. And so the other thing about intuition is you have to be proactive about meeting those needs. You have to be proactive about activating that imagination, the intuitive conversation, the quiet alone time to reflect on your internal intuitive parts. It's a deliberate thing that intuitives have to take action around, I think. So if someone is wired intuitively, thinking about 2022 to set themselves up for success, finding avenues and outlets for that intuition can be powerful for them. That's a really big leverage point. And it can set you up at like 10x. It can give you on results based on just that little understanding about yourself.
Well, it's like food. It's mental food. If you're intuitive and you're not getting enough brainstorming or quiet reflective time to access imagination, it's like you're missing a nutrient. Yeah. You can survive it, but you'll
die inside.
But eventually over time you're going to feel like your body, it's like your spirit's taking a hit. And it will be as lethargic as your body is when it is missing an important nutrient.
I feel seen, guys. 2021 was a really full year. I didn't get out camping or hiking alone at all. And I have incredible results to show for this year. But I look at, 2 years ago, I was on Mount Rainier for 5 weeks in a row, November and early December, out there hiking alone 5 weeks in a row, once a week. What a champion. But the last year, 0. That's the problem. Yeah. But I think, how can I even audit my reality? You guys you guys do coaching for a living, so it makes sense. But it feels like, wow, I can see how understanding myself better, like I'm planning out. I can imagine Joel and Antonia a report card on my plans for January and say, okay, so because you're like this, like, do you have enough of this or that? What are the ingredients you're putting in your recipe for even January, much less 2022? And are you setting yourself up for failure or for success in that way? But how can anyone audit their plans to understand if they are setting themselves up to thrive or struggle?
So one thing about type, again, I think I mentioned this in the previous one, I'm not sure, but one thing about type is that we either over or undervalue it. We overvalue it by thinking that small amounts of information are all you need in order to understand yourself completely, or we undervalue it by not seeing its implications. So I say all of that to indicate that for us, and this is just what we do, all right, so we do this for ourselves, we take what we know about our personality types, and that is what our best fit type is in the Myers-Briggs system. And then understanding what your best fit type is like I mentioned, is a decoder ring for these cognitive functions, which is actually the real power of this entire system. So once you know how your mind is wired, now you can get an idea of all of the activities and all the thought processes that reward each of these functions. And if you see how your mind is wired in descending order of preference, so descending order of preference basically means that there are 8 cognitive functions in total, and one of them is going to be basically how you identify yourself. It's going to be such a huge part of how you see yourself that like if I ask you to describe yourself, you will unconsciously spend 80% of your time actually describing this mental process. So it's really critical and crucial to make sure that that mental process is getting enough time, because it's how you gain energy, by using it. As long as it's getting enough time, and also skill development. So there's a difference between talents and skills. These mental processes or cognitive functions are basically your hardwired talents. They're the things that you're naturally good at, but you still have to build skill. And when you're building skill in these functions, the ones that are high up, right, like the ones you prefer, as you build skill, that's part of the nutrients. That's part of the food. You can feel yourself kind of like improving, gaining confidence over time, and getting all of those like dopamine and serotonin hits, right? Your body or your mind is wired to give you chemical rewards for using that particular function. And then there's other functions that are sort of in descending order. And when that 4-letter code in the Myers-Briggs system gives you all of that information if you go to the right resources, right? If you go to the right places. And part of personally, heck, that's what we do.
Yeah, I'm looking at your courses of videos. There's all this content here. Where do I go to get that for me and my wife? That sounds important, to get the decoder ring thing.
So if you do any basic online assessment, you'll get a starting point. Sometimes you get lucky and they give you your best fit accurate type first of all, like it starts out. Sometimes it's close. And then you read a profile, where you read a description of that personality type. If it feels like it fits like a glove, then you probably have landed on your best fit type. If it's one of those kind of, sort of, then you might be close, and you might have to do a little bit more reading. But once you discover your best fit type,
and we have an assessment on our site.
We do have an assessment.
Yeah, you can take it.
Right.
It's a test you take, and it'll give you your type. Yeah.
Right. Once you take that assessment, or once you land on your best fit type, now you can match up that type with what's called your cognitive functions. And we illustrate it as a car model, that there are 4 of these 8 functions that are particularly influential to you. And we call them the driver, the co-pilot, the 10-year-old, and the 3-year-old. Mm-hmm. When you get that piece of information, it unlocks loads of other information. We were talking before about how there are certain nutrients your brain needs. Well, effectively, those nutrients are the things that feed those parts of who you are, that driver and that co-pilot function. It is also how you get leverage on yourself. So we talked about the intuitive and sensing piece, which is the elements that you need as an individual in order to feel nourished. But it's really how you see the world. It's how you make sense of it. What are the things that you're interested in? We talked about intuition, being interested in sort of conceptual pattern recognition ideas, and sensory preferences being more about being in the experience and basically meeting expectations. But there's also thinking and feeling preferences. And those thinking and feeling preferences are effectively how you unconsciously evaluate criteria. That is massive leverage. Knowing how you unconsciously evaluate information is how you, we call it throw your hat over the fence. You can create situations and circumstances that are tailored to those decision-making criteria in order to be consistent with how your brain already wants to behave. So that's all very conceptual. I can give you an example if you want me to.
It sounds like that this is how I could design a 2022 so that this time next year I could look back and be like, yeah, satisfied, right?
Yeah.
If you're scratching the itches of your personality. So you end the year and you go, because there's sometimes I have inconsistent results when it comes to some things I do that are victories, if you look from the outside, and I feel like, sure, whatever, I did this thing. And other things I do that are victories, where I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. Mm-hmm. I'm completely inconsistent when it comes to perceiving accurately. And so sometimes I have to have other people saying, wow, you did really great at that. I think, oh, thanks. Because I didn't care. Like I didn't hear it loudly.
Right. Well, and what's interesting is that sometimes when we have victories that are how we're naturally wired, how our brain is naturally wired, we do shrug because we're used to those being victories. We're used to being good at that. And sometimes when we have victories in ways where our brain isn't naturally wired, that's when it felt like a Herculean feat. And then we like pat ourselves on the back. So
that
a victory
dangerous for sabotage.
A victory that you're not celebrating doesn't mean that wasn't the right victory for you.
God, where's your guys' book? Do you have a book on this yet? Because I need and apparently it has to be tailored to my particular personality and car model and everything. Because so I have vacation time coming up and I'm thinking about, well, how do I want to really plan out the next year? But with everything you're saying, you've said something like 10 different book titles in the last half hour, where I think, yes, reading that book and applying it to what I have written out so far for 2022, this feels important. Like one of the just the best things you said here was this, how to get leverage on yourself. And I can really see that if I did that well, my chances of winning would go way up. And if I screwed it up and I worked anti-leverage, I can see how I could work twice as hard this next year and fail embarrassingly and in public.
What does winning mean for you?
It's a great question. 2022 for me is my year of, I'm buying my mom's company. She's retiring. So I'm deploying a whole new company as alongside Redbeard, and then taking my wife's company to the next level. And then I have a COO client that I'm really taking to the next level with his company. And I have my Redbeard Accelerator membership that helps companies go and get their first $10,000 who are starting businesses, or they've been going for a while, but they want to turn it from a side business into being a full-time, replace their income kind of thing. So taking that membership from where it currently is, which is small-ish, to being the next size. And then for the podcast, looking at, is the podcast, and here's a great thing, great question, and you guys might have some kind of insight. There's the podcast, 13,000 plus views, 124 episodes, fantastic connections, etc. But the live stream gets more views because publishing a live stream gets more attention in the moment, right? My highest viewed live stream is something like 5x my highest viewed podcast episode. Fascinating. Does that mean I should live stream more? Well, I don't know, because it's a different thing and it's a different vibe. Should I copy Scott Adams and just do a daily live stream with interesting people? Now, Scott Adams is a daily solo live stream, but then again, he's the Dilbert guy. He has all this stuff already. So it's not obvious that copying somebody else, when really John Lee Dumas of Entrepreneur on Fire, he just, at least he used to when he was doing a daily show, did 30 episodes in one day. He recorded one day a month. He guested on other people's podcasts one day a month. He was on 20 to 25 people's podcasts on a single day when he did all this recording for other people's stuff. So he had huge amounts of freedom and rest time. So when he came up to his one day of recording for his own podcast per month, he could just bring the fire. How interesting. And so it's not obvious to me which of those two things, because I love the podcast, and also being live has all kinds of interesting, and seeing people in the video thing, and video's the future, and connecting. But then the podcast, talking to somebody yesterday saying, oh yeah, I was binge listening to your podcast as I was driving.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because there's 124 episodes. There's episodes on everything related to business and mindset. So this is great. So I'm really thankful for that. So should I focus on one or the other, or do both? Not obvious. But knowing that I have the ENTP thing, and I've had some success in each of these platforms, I guess I'd ask, what questions should I be asking myself? Unless you can just tell me, do this because you'll like it more.
Well, I would just say, I mean, this might go beyond just type. This is to think through your business model and what you're attempting to do. Because I do a lot of thinking. We do a lot of thinking about this as well. And we were just talking yesterday about a YouTube strategy. We have a YouTube channel. We haven't really put a lot of effort into it. We certainly haven't done very many live streams. A couple of the things that I would consider is the difference in how people engage with media. So what's nice about audio, for example, I'm guessing your podcast is audio only, right?
That is correct.
So an audio podcast is really great because it's an intimate one-to-one experience between you and another person. You're basically, I mean, in effect, you're whispering in people's ears. I mean, metaphorically, but literally you're talking in somebody's ear, and it's a relationship between you and that other person. So what's really cool about a podcast, audio podcast, is you can build relationship over time. It's like having conversation over time, getting to know a friend, especially if it's a regular release schedule. It feels very much like they're getting to know you. Often when people come to our meetups, they'll come and introduce themselves. They might have heard us for years. They'll know our children's names, everything about us, and they feel very close to us. I have never met this person, but they feel very close to me. And it's a very unique experience to have to quickly get to know them because they know so much about me. It feels like the relationship is already preceded in a way. I'm sure you've experienced this with people too. So that's a very intimate experience. And I also noticed that people don't go back with podcasts. Podcasts aren't really good for discoverability. Like podcasts are stream focused, right? It's like last week's podcast. I don't really go back, even if it's evergreen content, even if it's content that was something that was useful from now all the way to the end of time. People don't think about going back 5 years to listen to an old podcast. They just don't. For some reason, we're not wired to think in terms of that, like on iTunes and other channels. They will, but it's not as common. With video, like YouTube, that is something that's more static. It's not a stream focus. So we've noticed that we put a video out 5 years ago. They're still getting a lot of views, a lot of traction. So live stream also, I think, has a little bit of that element. Live stream's more community, I think, and discoverability focused. It's a way to get new people. It's probably not. I mean, you can build relationship there, but it's more of a discoverability and building community and connections with people like us. Like, so it's a more like developing, social leadership groupings with also broadcasting them out, having conversations like this live. And I think the discoverability is really great for live stream. There's something also about audio that people's mind and imagination. I mean, have you ever heard like Garrison Keillor's Prairie Home Companion or any like the old time radio shows?
Don't tell anyone, but I'm giving a book of that to one of my family members for Christmas.
Fantastic.
Because Garrison Keillor, and the novel form is incredible to the book form. But I grew up listening to Prairie Home Companion.
So did I.
Yeah.
So did I. So it's great because you're listening audibly. It's larger than life in your head, right? You're making this thing bigger than it really is. So audio and video, I think, have different uses and different tool sets.
I think you can go deeper with a podcast too, because you're in this intimate space with the listener, and we're very mindful of that. Like when we do a podcast, we never say you out there, you guys, like you, like indicating in a full audience. We always say you, the listener. And at the end of the podcast, Joel always goes, well, you haven't had a microphone. Like Joel and I have had a microphone, or Antonia and I have, but you haven't. So what do you want to say? So we when we do podcasting, we make sure that we really honor the intimacy of it being a intimate conversation just between the two of us and one other person. It's the three of us. Whereas, like Joel mentioned, YouTube is more of a broadcast. It's like all you guys out there. And so with podcasting, we find that we gain a lot more. We're able to create a space, like a container, where much deeper concepts are welcomed, because a person's already in sort of this listening, reflective space. They're
usually driving, running on a treadmill, running outside, doing dishes. They're doing some activities, hypnotizing their physical body usually.
Right. Yeah.
And they're listening to us.
Whereas when we go deep in YouTube, people are like, oh, this is too long. Right. Like, oh, this is like, like they want it to be more, it's more already, it's more entertainment or edutainment oriented, because there's that visual component and people are used to watching TV. So
and you have to sit at your phone or computer leaning forward and like watching a video, whereas you can't have it playing in the background as you're doing dishes or something.
So exactly. I have a few thoughts here. So one is, your guys' podcast is the two of you, and you don't interview other people, right? My podcast is always me interviewing other people. My wife's podcast is almost always her doing solo, like you're talking about, her and the listener as an individual. So that's fascinating. There's also how much am I in my body and with someone's words? Like right now, I'm looking at a camera and I see your faces down below. So I'm on stage, right? That's a different kind of perspective. So in some ways, I'm communicating less with your ideas. If we just had audio, I'd probably be like, oh, or I'd be gesturing wildly like a crazy person to get my feelings across on audio only. But because we're video, I'm looking at a viewer, but not looking at your faces, which are down there, even though I can sort of see you vaguely. So it's just a different kind of vibe. Right. So let's bring this back to personality type. Knowing that I'm an ENTP, does that tell us anything about whether I should have a predilection towards video or audio?
No, it won't tell you that. Crap. But it will tell you that when you stumble upon the thing that you enjoy, you're going to struggle to stick with it, because you are programmed for novelty. And so the stretch for you would be to, once you stumble upon the thing that you do enjoy doing, to stick with it and build roots in it. So that constant question of like, what should I be doing? What should I be doing? In some ways, your brain is getting a reward for keeping the loop open. It doesn't want to close the loop. And so it goes, oh, should I do this? Should I do this? What do you guys think? Right? Because gathering the information and idea generating and thinking about a new thing, that's the dopamine hit that your brain is getting.
And your novelty seeking is why you're taking on too much this year. You're taking on too many companies and too many businesses you're afraid to make a decision on a few of them and focus in on them, because you don't want to let any opportunity slip through.
Right.
You want to take advantage of all those opportunities. And so you've actually taken on probably more than you're actually gonna be able to do this year effectively.
I'm taking on less in 2022 than I have in 2021. I am limiting how much I'm doing.
This is paring you down.
Wow.
Well, that's good.
Yes.
All right. We'll see.
So it won't tell you what you want, but it will tell you that when you know what you want, you might not listen to it, because then that closes up other opportunities.
And this is fascinating.
Yeah.
I shortly after starting my podcast, started working with people to make it happen. And after a while, settled on Rihanna, who then I helped her start her own company, Riverwood Media, managing people's podcasts for them. for people like me who want to create but don't want to deal with the details. So because of Rihanna, Redbeard Radio has been every single Tuesday morning, 5 a.m. Pacific for over 2 years.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it's not because of me. Now, what I do is I have, I don't know, maybe I'm down to 2 or 3 months of content that I've already recorded. It was as high as 4 months, I think. So I stay really far out in advance of her. I haven't always, but I'm good about that now. So as long as I stay months ahead of her, 10 plus episodes ahead, she just makes stuff happen. And through no fault of my own, the podcast happens. And little video snippets show up on Twitter through no fault of my own. They just happen. Mm-hmm. Because this team member, and because Rihanna and her company, she just has it. It's just to a place where I think about how can I tweak something or maybe change our video format, but I'm not that involved in the day-to-day, which is fantastic for me. But what you're telling me, I think, okay, well, that's sort of implying that I shouldn't be live streaming, even though it's exciting, it's a shiny thing, and also look at all these views, man. But instead, I should really be focusing on the doubling down on what is already working and what I already know. People listen to the podcast and then join my Redbeard Accelerator. That's already a thing that happens. It happened as recently as yesterday when someone said, I just binge listened to your podcast. And then that same day, they went to joinredbeard.com and now they're a member. Well, so
I'm not saying necessarily stick with what you know to be effective. I'm saying that your brain is going to want you to jump tracks even when it's not good for you. So
how do I avoid that? Or how do I protect myself from this inclination?
That is a really good question. So if you're a person who has a tendency to want to open a lot of loops, then the way that your mind is wired is it's not trying to sabotage you. It's not trying to do bad things. You are part of the ecosystem that reminds people of the importance of novelty. That's your place in the world. So trying a bunch of new things is actually what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be seeking that dopamine hit. The challenge that we have as people is that when we get that dopamine hit, we can almost get addicted to our own way of seeing things, and we end up being one-sided. So do the thing. Give yourself permission to be wired the way that you're wired. Give yourself permission to try out a bunch of new things and throw spaghetti against the wall and enjoy the process of novelty and outsourcing the details. That's very important as well. So give yourself permission to do all of that. Just make sure that you're getting to, that you're not stopping the process before it's complete. Close the loop. Don't just keep perpetually opening loops, but make sure that you're closing loops as you go. If you're closing every loop you open, then you're fine. Keep opening new loops. Just make sure you're getting to the point of closing, because ENPs, and both Joel and I are ENPs types in the Myers-Briggs system. I'm an ENTP, he's an ENFP. ENPs start to get bored at a certain point. They get to the 40% mark and they're like, oh, okay, I figured that out, I'm done. And 80% feels like you're done. You're like, I'm done, right? I completed the thing, but you still have 20% left.
I feel way too seen in this conversation.
That 20% is where the rewards come. So the biggest challenge of ENPs is that we stop things before we gain the rewards for them, which is why we need to keep going. When we can close a loop, we must. The one-sidedness isn't in the challenge isn't in opening loops. The challenge is in only opening loops. And so the highest leverage thing an ENP can do is start to land the plane, close the loops, finish things, and get the rewards for them. But if you're not really struggling with that, then that's not the leverage point. When you're trying to figure out which of the highest leverage actions for you, for me, it's always what is personally rewarding, what is meeting your own personal criteria. And personal criteria is like we talked the last time we talked to you, we talked about 4 different decision-making processes. Those 4 different decision-making processes are criteria. That's the thing, that when we obey those 4 different decision-making processes, whichever one is the right one for me, when I obey that, I feel a sense of satisfaction and completion. I feel like I did the right thing. And so knowing which one is yours, we're talking about cognitive functions. We talked about the sensory and intuitive part, but the thinking and feeling part, those are your evaluative criteria. And you can either do them based on the human component or you can do them on impersonal criteria. But knowing which one is yours is incredibly important, because then you can use that piece of information about how you operate to go, okay, I'm really struggling to get things done, or I'm struggling to figure out what action I should be taking, or I'm struggling to figure out, like, am I planning? When you know what your decision-making criteria is, you're able to ensure that you're the things that you want to accomplish are ticking off the boxes of that criteria. Because if that criteria isn't met, you're going to feel discouraged. You're going to be like, even if you're wildly successful, if it's not your brain's version of success, it won't care.
That's another book title, for goodness sakes. So who should I hire personality type wise? Because what you're drawing here is you're drawing a map, which is uncomfortably accurate of how I perceive my reality. And I'm also celebrating 10 years in business starting here shortly. So I have 10 years of data that says that you're right in how you perceive my actions, which we never met in person. So it's extra funny that you're so perceptive. I'm uncomfortable. But then again, of course, this is what you do. I get it. It's still uncomfortable. So for anybody else who wants to get really uncomfortable, that's the website to go to. But I'm curious about who should I hire when I look at who's the other half of me, the person who thrives on that. Is there a person that thrives on that 20% of closing a project and loves it? Or if I teamed up with this person, I would get way more done out of my 2022.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are personality types that are excellent at closing loops, that are really good at handling the mundane details. It sounds like, and there are certain types that are naturally wired towards that, but then there are other types that have just sort of figured out how to do it. And it doesn't punish them. So like our wiring is either like we're completely in alignment with this thing, this way of operating, or we're kind of neutral about it and we can build the skill or not build the skill. And then there are certain activities that are literally punishing for our brain. And so the things that we're naturally good at, the things that we're wired to be talented in, we want to optimize that as much as possible. We want to build our skills in that arena because that's how we bring our best selves to the table. But then there's like this whole world of things that we aren't wired to be naturally talented on around, but we can build skill. And oftentimes those are our stretches. Those are the things that we get good at, even though, we didn't get the spider bite, like the sort of the Spider-Man spider bite. Well, we can Batman that stuff as opposed to being bitten by the spider and having immediate radioactive abilities. We instead Batman it, right? We go get trained.
Yeah, I get it. Makes sense.
And there's a whole world of that where we can stretch into. And then there's an area of things that are literally punishing for our brain, that when we attempt to do them, we always fail, or it always seems like we put 5 times the effort and get half the return. And those are the things that we want to outsource. Now, there are certain personality types that will have that as their best way, their best modality, their spider bite. And then there'll be some personality types that have just Batman that. They can do it, but it's because they built the skill themselves. You're looking for people who fit into those categories. You're not looking for people who are doubling up on the same kinds of things being punishing to them as they are to you. And that's when you do that, that's oftentimes when you really are great at one area of your business, but this other area of your business is being neglected. Well,
I think about Rihanna and handling the podcast, that it would bore me out of my skull to go and consistently for 2 years, make sure all the guests all get their social media art, all the quotes are done just right, looking through all those transcripts to drag out all the quotes, creating the video snippets, scheduling everything in Libsyn just right, being perfectly accurate for 2 years. Yeah. She's been with me for over 104 episodes of the podcast. That would drive me insane. So, and she loves being really accurate. Or she'll go into the episodes and she'll there's an right there, and she'll go take the time to go take it out because it bothers her. Mm-hmm. And I tell her, I want an 80% solution here because she wants to make it perfect. Mm-hmm. Like it's a podcast. It doesn't have to be perfect. But she gets bothered by it not being. So I love her to death because if you ever listen, folks, to the podcast and it sounds amazing, that's because of Rihanna. That's not because I talk like that. That's her carefully manipulating things. So it sounds really good. The ideas are crystal clear. And so I feel very blessed to have her. But what's the personality type that I'm looking for here that's like a Rihanna, but is available? Because as I mentioned, these 4 different companies I'm involved in.
Unfortunately.
And
no, help me, guys.
There's no magic bullet, man.
If you notice, I'm not giving you a personality type. And
I know.
That's the and people don't know this outside of the type world, but this is part of why personality types get a bad rap, is because people will do this. It's actually considered unethical practice to say this is the personality type that you're looking to hire. It's considered unethical.
That's what I was hoping for.
Yeah.
I was thinking part of my onboarding process can be go to personalityhacker.com, take this test, show me your results, and then I'll know who to hire.
That's right. And then I'll just
if only it was that easy, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, is that humans are complex, and that's why we keep saying it's one node in the system of who you are.
And this is through trial and error on our side. Mm-hmm. We've actually we've actually kind of like, oh, I think we're looking for this kind of type of person. And so we won't hire based on type, but we've been like kind of, and often we've put people of certain types in positions where like they'll probably thrive in this position because they're that type. And it hasn't always worked out that way. And then other types that we've hired, well, they probably wouldn't be, but then all of a sudden they step up and take on stuff, different roles that aren't as expected of that personality type. And so we've learned get away from using type as a way to judge. I mean, it's a sense of aptitude, of course, and the way somebody wires and shows up to things, right? There's tendencies and trends, but really people are unique and individual, and they do surprise you. And the 16 types in the Myers-Briggs system, they're not designed to put all 8 billion people on the planet into boxes. They're supposed to show us the 16 archetypical patterns of those 8 billion people and where they overlap and are similar, so we can actually see the individuation and the differences between humans and the special unique characteristics we show up. So you can't use really type to take 8 billion people and sort them into who you're going to hire or not. It just doesn't work that way.
Or fall in
the
love
human
with,
spirit's just too big.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The human spirit's too big. That's exactly.
That's your next book title. Man, you guys got some writing to do. There's only 2 weeks left in the year.
Get all these titles back from this recording because we got to make some books out of it.
That's why I said we have a tendency to over and undervalue it. So it's well, if I can't just choose a type and then hire them or fall in love with them or whatever, then what's the point? And that's when we undervalue it. The amount of information that is represented in your personality type is extraordinary. It's extraordinary. There are so many things that it can explain about a person, and again, get leverage. Like you don't know who to hire, but you can certainly know. Like for me, okay. So I'll just take me as an example. I'm an ENCP. I'm wired also for novelty, and I have a tendency to want to open loops without closing them. So what do? Right? How do I close loops? Well, I'm wired with a very interesting decision-making mentality. I want things to be completely logical, completely rational, make complete and total sense to me, be radically honest in a way that could potentially be offensive, and I want to get everybody's needs met at the same time, right?
Sounds
and
like
those
me.
two things are a battle inside of me all the time, right? I want it to be rigorously logical, and I also want everybody to like me. So when
those don't match up often.
They don't. So when I'm thinking about how to design my life, I'm more focused on what's logical and rational to me. That's my own personal lifestyle design. But if I want to get leverage on myself to close a loop, I rope in other people's expectations. I go, okay, so where do I have to show up for other people or they're going to be mad at me? And so those are two, like those, I understand that polarization inside of me. And because I understand that polarization inside of me, I just create context and I start creating circumstances and contexts to make sure that when it comes to me and making decisions about my life, I'm going to do it in a radically honest way. I'm not going to pretend to believe things I don't believe. I'm not going to make actions that other people want me to take just because it'll fulfill their expectations. I'm not going to live my life that way. But if I want to get something done, then I can definitely go based on other people's expectations. So it not only tells me how my mind is wired, it also tells me when I should be doing certain things and when I shouldn't. Because you'll hear these adages, like, well, don't care what anybody else thinks. Just do what just do what makes you happy, or just follow your heart, or just do what makes sense to you. And then you're going to be fine. Well, in some contexts, that doesn't work for me, because if I do that, I won't get anything done because I don't care about anybody else anymore. Right. And so when do I care about other people's expectations? When do I try to match them and live up to them? When do I rope other people in? Well, I've discovered that the one time I want to do that is when I want to get something done. And so it's also understanding how your mind is wired in a way where you can leverage all these pieces of who you are to put them into moments on the timeline. This is when I'm going to be doing this part of my personality. This is when I'm going to be doing this part of my personality.
Jesus, another book.
Like
this
tools.
is a part of my personality that I probably should always be outsourcing to other people because I'm never going to be good at this. This is the thing I can't outsource because I'm always going to be the best at it. And those are the kinds of things you can understand about yourself, which are really high leverage pieces of information. But it won't tell me who to marry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I got married this year, so I'm already set on that
Yeah,
one.
you're good.
Congratulations on that, by the way.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. I'm beyond blessed.
Yeah.
And even even my wife, the different parts of our personality and how they show through. It's just incredible that she has a vision for things like, here's how the kitchen in this house we moved into a year ago. Here's how the kitchen could look. And so she has a vision. And then I say, okay, well, write it down. And So I largely end up living to a significant extent in this world that it's her vision of that I then facilitate. And the hammer might be in my hand, making it happen, but it's creating a vision that comes through my wife's brain, like her experience of the world. And it's this fascinating balance of whether it's from what the garden looks like to anything.
It's cool.
It's just, I'm beyond blessed.
Awesome.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
I could talk to you guys forever. Let's talk about your company for people who are like, wow, these people are smart. Why have they not written more books? Which is, what I'm saying. We have personalityhacker.com is where all your stuff is. We got the free test there. Talk to me about your program catalog and talk to me about your certified personality expert human. Are they the person who's going to tell me who to hire if you guys won't?
We've told them not to. So. Kind of in the same vein of the idea of all these book titles. And you're like, why would you read more than one book? Because we do have a book. It's called Personality Hacker, same name as our company. You can find Amazon, all major book retailers. I recommend people order it through their local bookstore, though. I think that's the best way to do it. That book is fantastic. It was really hard for us to write it because we're orators. We're not necessarily writers. We can write, but it's 10x harder for us to write than just to get on a camera or a microphone and talk. And so the reason why you're asking, like, what should I do? Should I do like video, audio, podcasting, writing, whatever? Like, we just decided like, we're not going to go into the book world yet because that's just so much harder for us. We'd have to have a lot of help with that. Mm-hmm. But we do have a ton of programs at personalityhacker.com because we are orators, video and audio creators, digital publishers. We've created basically an entry point for people. When they discover their type, we call it a starter kit. And we have these for all of the 16 Myers-Briggs types. And it's designed to give some information, of course, overview of what is the Myers-Briggs system? What is your personality type? All the information you need. But then it really changes in the middle of that starter kit for your personality type to start talking about what to do with that information. Mm-hmm. Like when you get stuck and you're a sticking point in your life, you keep doing the same habits over and over and you want to break from them. What do you do? How do you get out of that loop experience? Or you're gripped by something that's really down or back.
I like some of my habits. Some of my habits have worked great for me. And also, it's clear that some of my habits, like, man, when Antonia, your whole open loops thing, that's uncomfortably personal for me. When I look at how true that is, it's not the version of myself that I want to step forward, like say to my in-laws, hey there, in-laws, who might be listening to this. Some of them do. Hey there, so I don't close loops very well. Thanks for welcoming me into the family.
Of course.
That doesn't feel good. That's not, it's not a good, or not proud, I should say. That's not, or I'm like, I'm really good at not closing the loops. Admire me. It's just not it. So yeah, so we got the starter kit. And then we have these other courses. We have things like, we have couples mapping. I saw that and thought, that sounds important. Can you mention something about couples mapping?
So as we mentioned before, knowing your personality type won't tell you which personality type to couple up with. Or partner with. But when you know your type and you know your partner's type, then that is a source of an almost infinite amount of information. So couples mapping is designed to help people, when they know their types, orient to each other, to understand each other, what are trigger points, what are things that they're going to take personally, what are miscommunication, like sort of trends around miscommunication, what are the things that help them feel honored and seen and respected. And basically it's like a map. It's a map of your personality type and their personality type and understanding them side by side.
We have a colleague of ours, Dr. Dario Nardi, who does a lot of work with us. And we were just talking to him recently. He talked about the science shows that the biggest indicator of a successful relationship is not good communication. It's not, setting up all the systems properly in your relationship and all of this. It's self-awareness of each person in the relationship. The more self-aware they are of themselves, the better the relationship dynamic is, and the more self-aware both people can be. So imagine just being self-aware of yourself increases your relationship and your partner doing it. But imagine if you had something to do together that made you self-aware of yourself, but also while the other person is doing it too, you're getting to glimpse in how they're also becoming more self-aware. And we've seen couples, this is transformational for couples, because once you understand yourself and you really are seeing the other person understanding themselves and understanding them too, that creates a powerful relationship, in our opinion and minds.
And then you asked about the consultant. On our under our catalog, you'll see the option to hire a consultant to help you find your best fit type. If you're new to this, if you're struggling to find your best fit type, and then you want some information on how to orientate yourself to what it means to be that personality type and all those mental processes mentioned before, then you can go through assessments, online assessments. There are a lot of different resources and tools, but that's a long game. Oftentimes it takes sometimes people years to figure out what their personality type is. And a consultation is like a 90-minute version of it. So it's like the difference between like walking across the state and flying across the state. So a consultation will help you find your best fit type very quickly. And we also offer that service too.
And reveal some of the things you told me today about my personality type and just embarrassingly talking about what I don't get done, because that's just who I am, sort of. And you got to go compensate. And if I don't compensate, I'm going to create a dumpster fire. It's just how it is.
Right.
Okay. So the book, Personality Hacker, harness the power of your personality type to transform your work, relationships, and life. And then that's personalityhacker.com is where to go to get that assessment that says a big old red button, start your free test. I will definitely be maybe even asking my wife to go watch this whole 50-minute live stream just to hear more about my personality. Through the words of Antonia.
Well, and also most people find us through the podcast. So if you just want to get a taste of what we have to offer and the different subjects we cover and talk about, Personality Hacker, the podcast, is a great entry point as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that if folks want to go take a look at that, here is one place to go, personalityhacker.com/PH-podcast, or you can go listen on wherever it's offered. Stick around. I want to ask you guys more questions. We're going to hop off live here. Personalityhacker.com, folks, is the place to go to get perhaps an uncomfortable view into why it is that you win the ways you do, why it is you lose the ways that you do. And if you start learning what I even imagine, folks, if you have the level of awareness that Antonia and Joel have shared just today, and imagine if you could design your 2022, you even heard some things I'm going to be thinking about more heavily, including maybe hiring someone opposite of me. Not that they'll tell me who it is, but to go and make 2022 a greater chance of victory in all the ways that I want to win. It's this personality test. Go ahead, take that, and then consider that starter kit thing to go and dive more deeply into it. Thank you both so much for being on Redbeard Live, and stick around, and I'll see you later. Bye, all the rest of you.